Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're tackling a fascinating, but honestly pretty critical puzzle of our modern aquatic ecosystems. We're talking about eutrophication. If you've ever walked past a lake that looks, more like a bowl of thick green pea soup, or if you've heard the news reports about massive dead zones in the ocean, well, you've actually witnessed this phenomenon firsthand. It's a complex issue for sure, because it intricately ties together our massive global food production with the health of the very water we rely on. So let's just dive right in and unpack exactly what is happening beneath the surface. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start by defining eutrophication, then weigh the natural versus cultural causes, dive into the ecological and economic impacts, and finally, wrap up with remedies and sustainable solutions. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, defining eutrophication. So what exactly does this term mean? Fundamentally, eutrophication revolves around a massive, overwhelming overload of nutrients. And when we say nutrients here, we're primarily talking about nitrogen and phosphorus. Now, in small amounts, these are the basic building blocks of life, totally essential for any aquatic ecosystem to thrive. But when a body of water becomes overly enriched, literally flooded with an excess of these nutrients, it acts like a hyperdrive for aquatic plants and algae. It stimulates growth at rates the ecosystem simply cannot handle on its own. Think of this process as happening in 4 distinct stages. We start with the oligotrophic stage. This is your pristine, clear water with low nutrient concentrations and very limited plant growth. As nutrients gradually increase, it becomes mesotrophic, supporting moderate growth. But then we hit the tipping point, the eutrophic stage. Here, dense mats of algae bloom on the surface, making the water murky and beginning to lower the oxygen. Finally, in severe cases, we reach the hyper-eutrophic stage. The water might turn bright green or even red, emitting this incredibly foul odor, and the dissolved oxygen drops so low that massive organism death occurs. And that tragic endgame of the hypereutrophic stage leads us directly into hypoxia, or, as you've probably heard it called, a dead zone. When those massive algal blooms eventually die off, the bacteria that decompose them go to work, and they consume incredible amounts of dissolved oxygen from the water in the process. It gets to a point where the oxygen is so severely depleted that any aerobic aquatic life, we're talking fish, crabs, shrimp, they literally suffocate. If they can't migrate out of the area fast enough, they die, leaving behind this barren, underwater wasteland. Which brings us to the next vital question. How do all these excess nutrients get into the water in the first place? Let's look at Section 2, natural versus cultural causes. The contrast in timelines here is just wild. You see, eutrophication isn't entirely unnatural. Natural eutrophication is actually a very gradual aging process for a lake. It happens over centuries as weathering rocks, atmospheric deposition, and natural soil erosion slowly add nutrients. The ecosystem has plenty of time to adapt. But then we have cultural eutrophication. This is hyper-accelerated by human activities, things like agricultural fertilizer runoff, sewage discharge, and industrial waste. Instead of centuries, this massive nutrient dump happens in mere decades. It completely overwhelms the water body's ability to cope. To understand just how easily these nutrients escape our control, check out this brilliant data from a University of Massachusetts study on fertilizer efficiency in seed geraniums. This nitrogen balance sheet really tells the story. Notice the leached category. This is the nitrogen that just washes away with the water instead of being absorbed by the plant. With ammonium sulfate, a whopping 43% is leached. Calcium nitrate is even higher at 46%. This perfectly illustrates how heavily nutrient runoff depends on the specific type of fertilizer being used. When nearly half the fertilizer applied to crops is washing right off into our watersheds, cultural eutrophication accelerates incredibly fast. Now let's think about how economists view this problem, because this builds into the broader societal impact. Eutrophication is a textbook example of a negative externality. That basically means the negative costs created by a process are not paid for by the people creating them. For example, industries and farms in the American Midwest apply fertilizers that leach into the Mississippi River. That nutrient pollution travels and eventually feeds massive dead zones all the way down in the Gulf of Mexico. Because the producers up in the Midwest don't directly feel the financial fallout happening hundreds of miles away, there's a strong economic incentive to just continue business as usual. So what actually happens when business continues as usual? Let's shift our focus to Section 3, ecological and economic impacts. The ecological domino effect here is, it's devastating. First, the massive algal blooms sit on the surface. Actually, scratch that. They don't just sit there. They completely block the sunlight, shading out and killing deeper benthic plants that provide crucial habitat. Then, as we talked about, the decaying algae depletes the oxygen, leading to massive fish kills that utterly disrupt the local food web. But it doesn't stop with marine life. Human health is directly threatened too. Certain toxins from these blooms can contaminate drinking water, causing blue baby syndrome in infants due to excess nitrates. And even direct physical contact from swimming can cause severe skin rashes and respiratory issues. And the scale of what is financially at risk is truly staggering. $680 billion. That is the annual valuation of the Gulf of Mexico fishing industry. Catches from this region account for an unbelievable 40% of the total United States fishing yield. And this massive, vital economic engine is directly threatened by the continued expansion of hypoxic dead zones fueled by that nutrient runoff. Let's zoom in on a specific sector to see how this connects directly to you and me. The Gulf supports a $400 billion shrimp industry on its own. As dead zones form and suitable habitats shrink, the shrimp are forced into much smaller, highly concentrated pockets of water. This dramatically increases the risk of overfishing. In fact, a landmark 2017 study from Duke University was able to empirically link rising eutrophication in the Gulf directly to rising shrimp prices. That means a hypoxic zone miles out at sea translates directly to a higher price tag for a shrimp dinner at your local grocery store or restaurant. And the economic damage isn't just isolated to the fishermen pulling up empty nets. It creates a massive ripple effect. When commercial fishing yields drop, seafood processing plants lose their volume, which potentially leads to job losses. Restaurants are forced to spike their seafood prices to cover costs. Furthermore, those unsightly blooms and foul odors wash up on shorelines, directly deterring tourists, which causes coastal hospitality and tourism revenues to just plummet. The whole shebang is deeply interconnected. Okay, fortunately, we aren't totally powerless against this. Time for some good news in Section 4, remedies and sustainable solutions. We actually have a fantastic arsenal of biological methods to combat this. Bioaugmentation involves introducing specific nutrient-consuming microbes into the water to break down that excess organic matter. Biomanipulation takes it a step further by altering the actual fish species composition, maybe introducing fish that naturally eat the excess algae. But my absolute favorite here has to be the restoration of oyster reefs. Oysters are absolutely brilliant ecosystem engineers. They act as natural water filters, continuously filtering out massive amounts of nitrogen and phosphorus simply by eating, all while providing a rich habitat for other marine life. Next up, we have chemical interventions. We can use carbon-based compounds like biochar or specialized compost added directly to soils to trap nutrients before they ever run off the land, a process nicely tied to carbon sequestration. In the water treatment process itself, we can utilize biological nitrogen-reducing agents. Specific bacteria, like Nitrosomonas, can be deployed to systematically convert harmful ammonia into nitrite and eventually straight into harmless nitrogen gas. This safely strips the excess nutrients away, long before they can fuel an algae bloom. Finally, we have the heavy-duty physical methods. We can build massive artificial infrastructure, like constructed wetlands and bioreactors, which basically act as physical sponges and filters to trap agricultural runoff. And in cases where a lake is already severely degraded and the toxic nutrients have settled deep into the mud, we can employ dredging. This is the physical, mechanical removal of contaminated sediment right off the bottom of the lake bed. It's essentially hitting the reset button on the nutrient balance of the environment. All of these solutions are absolutely vital, but they bring us to a profound, lingering question to end our explainer today. We've seen how deeply interconnected our actions are, right? The fertilizer used to grow the crops that feed the world can simultaneously suffocate the oceans that sustain us. So how do we balance the immense pressure of global agricultural food production with the vital, fragile survival of our aquatic ecosystems? It's a huge challenge of innovation, policy, and awareness. I want you to think deeply about where your food comes from and the hidden costs of producing it. Thank you so much for exploring this crucial topic with me today.